She thought I was at work. But I saw everything. You ever have one of those days where everything seems completely normal, and then, out of nowhere, your whole world flips upside down? That's exactly what happened to me. One moment, I was living what I thought was a regular, happy life, and the next, I found myself staring at something I wish I never had. You think you know someone, you trust them, and then in a split second, all of that can be shattered. I never expected what I was about to see, especially not from someone I trusted with my heart. So here's what happened. I've been working the same job for years. One of those jobs that keeps you busy but pays well enough to make up for the time you spend away from home. My schedule was pretty predictable. I'd go to work, come back late, and spend whatever time I had left with my wife. We've been together for a few years, and things were good. At least, I thought they were. We had our routines, we made plans together, and like anyone in a long-term relationship, I trusted her completely. You don't expect anything out of the ordinary when you're just going through your usual day-to-day, right? That day started like any other. I headed off to work early, just like I always did, thinking it would be another typical day. But little did I know, my plans were about to change, and what I'd stumble upon when I got back home would change everything. I wasn't even supposed to be home at that time. I should have been stuck at work for the rest of the day, but fate had other ideas. What I saw that afternoon made me question everything I thought I knew about my life and the person I loved. This is the story of how I discovered a truth that was hidden from me, one that I was never supposed to see. The title says it all. She thought I was at work, but I saw everything. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is something no one ever wants to go through. But it's my story, and I need to tell it. My wife and I had been together for a good few years. We had a solid relationship, or at least I thought we did. From the outside, everything looked pretty normal. We met, fell in love, and got married like any regular couple. The first couple of years were great. We'd laugh together, go out on weekends, and just enjoy each other's company. Life wasn't perfect, but it felt right. I had a steady job that kept me busy most days. I'd leave early in the morning and come back late in the evening. And because of my long hours, I didn't always notice the little things that were changing in our relationship. My job gave us a comfortable life. I worked regular hours, and though it meant I was away a lot, it allowed us to live without any major financial worries. My routine was pretty much the same every day. Get up, go to work, come home and spend time with her before we both headed off to bed. We didn't have kids, so it was just the two of us most of the time. Things seemed fine, at least on the surface. But looking back, I realize now that things had been off for a while before I truly started to notice. A few months ago, I began to see changes in her behavior. Subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. At the time, I brushed them off. You know how it is, everyone has their off days, right? Maybe she was just stressed or tired, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just 1 or 2 days. It was happening more often. She wasn't as open with me as she used to be. We used to talk about everything, but slowly those conversations became less frequent. She seemed distant sometimes, like she was lost in her own world, and I didn't know how to reach her. The first real red flag was her phone. She started spending a lot more time on it than usual. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone's glued to their phone these days. But it became a bit too much. She was always texting, always scrolling, and when I'd ask her who she was talking to, she'd brush it off with quick, vague answers. Just a friend, or it's nothing, she'd say. But the way she would suddenly turn her phone screen away when I got close, or how she'd leave the room to take calls, it didn't sit right with me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something felt off. Then came the late nights. She started going out more, telling me she was meeting up with friends or going to the gym. Now don't get me wrong, I didn't mind her going out. In fact, I encouraged it. We both had our own space and time to do our own thing. But these outings became more frequent, and she seemed to have new excuses every time. "Oh, I'm just meeting an old friend for dinner," she'd say, or "I'll be home late, don't wait up." At first I believed her, why wouldn't I? But after a while it started feeling strange. There were no names attached to these friends she was meeting, no familiar faces from her usual circle. And when I'd ask for details, she'd get defensive or just change the subject. That's when I started to really feel something was wrong. I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking it, that I was just being paranoid because of how busy I'd been with work. But the more distant she became, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on behind my back. I began paying closer attention. Small things, like how she'd always make sure her phone was locked when she left it on the table, or how she seemed overly cheery after coming back from her nights out. She also stopped making an effort to spend time with me. Before, we'd always plan little date nights or find time to relax together, but now she'd always have some excuse. "I'm too tired," or "I already made plans," she'd say. And I didn't want to seem like I was being too clingy or suspicious, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. My gut was telling me that things were slipping between us, but I wasn't ready to face the truth just yet. I didn't want to jump to conclusions without any real proof, so I kept my worries to myself for the time being. It was hard to pinpoint when exactly I started feeling like I didn't know her anymore. But the changes were there. Little by little, our relationship felt less like a partnership and more like two people just living under the same roof. I could feel her slipping away, but I didn't know why. All I knew was that the woman I had married, the woman I had trusted with everything, was hiding something from me, and I was determined to figure out what it was. That day started like any other. I got up, went to work, and expected it to be another long, busy day. I had no idea how much things would change in just a few hours. Around midday, I got news from my boss that a big project I had been working on was suddenly postponed. We were supposed to be in meetings all day, but now I found myself with a completely free afternoon. It felt strange. After weeks of non-stop work, I didn't even know what to do with the unexpected free time. That's when the idea hit me. Why not head home early and surprise my wife? We hadn't been spending much time together lately, so maybe this could be a chance to reconnect. I imagined we could grab lunch or just hang out like we used to. So I packed up my things and left the office, feeling a bit lighter than usual. As I drove back, I couldn't help but smile, thinking how nice it would be to catch her off guard with a surprise visit. We used to love little moments like that. I was picturing her face, imagining how she'd light up when she saw me come home early. I convinced myself that whatever distance we had been feeling was just a phase, something we could fix with more time together. But as I pulled into the driveway, something didn't feel right. At first, I didn't notice it, but then I saw another car parked a little ways down the street. It wasn't ours, and it wasn't any car I recognized from the neighborhood. My mind immediately started running through explanations. Maybe she had a friend over? Maybe it was a delivery guy or something? Still, something in the back of my mind told me to be cautious. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but the feeling stayed with me as I got out of the car and walked up to the front door. I stood there for a moment, keys in hand, feeling an odd mix of excitement and nervousness. The house was quiet, too quiet. Normally, when I came home, I could hear the sound of the TV or music playing. But today, there was nothing, just silence. It was strange, but I brushed it off. Maybe she was napping or in the shower. Still, my gut told me something was off. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The silence hit me even harder once I was in. It felt eerie. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I called out her name, expecting to hear her voice call back, but there was nothing. My heart started to race a little as I walked further into the house. Each step felt heavier, like I was walking into something I didn't want to face. As I made my way through the house, I noticed small things that seemed out of place. Her shoes by the door, her phone on the kitchen counter, but no sign of her anywhere. Then, I heard it, faint voices coming from upstairs. My chest tightened. Who could she possibly be talking to? The tone of the voices was hushed, like they were trying not to be heard. My pulse quickened as I slowly started making my way up the stairs. With each step, the voices became clearer, but I still couldn't make out what they were saying. My mind was racing now, trying to come up with explanations. Was she talking to a friend? Was someone helping her with something? But deep down, I knew. I knew what was happening even before I saw it. There was no denying the feeling in the pit of my stomach. I reached the top of the stairs and stood in front of our bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. I could hear everything clearly now. Low voices, a soft laugh, the rustling of sheets. My hands started shaking as I reached for the doorknob. I pushed the door open quietly, just enough to see inside, and that's when I saw it. My wife and another man lying in our bed. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart felt like it had stopped, and everything around me blurred. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This was my wife, the person I had trusted with everything. And she was with someone else, in the home we had built together. They didn't notice me at first. I stood there frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. It felt like time had stopped, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. Then she looked up and saw me standing there. The look on her face said it all. Shock, guilt, fear. The room fell silent. The man scrambled to get out of bed, but I didn't care about him. My eyes were locked on her, and all I could feel was the overwhelming weight of betrayal. In that moment, everything we had built together, crumbled. The trust, the love, the years we spent, it was all gone in an instant. I didn't know what to say or do. My mind was spinning with a million thoughts, but the only thing I could focus on was the pain. The betrayal. This wasn't just some mistake, it was a choice. She chose to lie to me, to break my trust, and in that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I just stood there, frozen. My brain couldn't catch up to what my eyes were seeing. There she was, the woman I trusted, in the arms of someone else, in our bed. My heart was pounding, my breath felt stuck in my chest, but I couldn't move or say anything at first. It was like my body was paralyzed, trapped in that awful moment. Time seemed to stop, and all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. My mind kept screaming that this couldn't be happening, that maybe I had walked into some nightmare. But it wasn't a dream. It was real, and I had to face it. There's no way to prepare for something like this. I never thought I'd be in this position, standing there watching everything I thought I knew fall apart in front of me. Then, something snapped. I found my voice, though it sounded strange, like it wasn't really coming from me. What the hell is going on? The words came out shaky, but they hung in the air like a bomb. It was like the room exploded with tension. They both jumped, startled by my presence. She scrambled to sit up, clutching the blanket to her chest, her face pale as if the blood had drained from it. The guy, whoever he was, looked just as shocked. For a second, he looked like he didn't know whether to stay or bolt for the door. His eyes flicked back and forth between me and her, clearly panicking, but I wasn't looking at him anymore. My eyes were locked on her, my wife, the woman who promised me forever. How could you? I managed to say, my voice barely more than a whisper. The words felt like they were tearing my throat apart. I wanted to scream, to yell, but I couldn't. All I felt was this hollow, gut-wrenching pain. She stammered, her voice trembling. It's not what it looks like. Of course it was the cliché excuse, the one line you always hear when someone gets caught red-handed. It almost made me laugh how ridiculous it sounded. Not what it looks like? What else could it be? I shook my head, unable to comprehend how she could even think of trying to deny it. I pointed to the guy still sitting there awkwardly, half-dressed, avoiding my gaze. Who the hell is he? How long has this been going on? My voice was louder now, demanding answers. I needed something to make sense of the chaos in my head. She looked down, biting her lip, unable to meet my eyes. She knew there was no way out of this. It just happened. It was a mistake, she muttered, as if that would somehow make it better. As if saying it was a mistake would erase the image burned into my brain. A mistake? I repeated, my anger starting to rise. A mistake is spilling coffee, forgetting a birthday. This is something else. I couldn't even find the right words to describe the betrayal. It was so much deeper than just a mistake. She had broken the trust, shattered everything we built together, and now she was trying to downplay it like it wasn't a big deal. The guy finally decided to speak, his voice low and filled with shame. I'm sorry, man, I didn't know. He trailed off, not even finishing the sentence. He was lying. He had to know. But at that point, I didn't care about him. He was just a shadow in the background. My focus was on her. She started crying, her hands covering her face as if the tears would somehow erase what had just happened. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she sobbed. "I don't even know how it got this far." Hearing her say that only made it worse. "You didn't mean for this to happen. What does that even mean?" I could feel the rage building inside me, mixing with the hurt and confusion. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I didn't. I just stood there, stunned, trying to make sense of it all. I asked, almost as if I needed to hear it for myself, "How long?" She hesitated, wiping at her tears before finally whispering, "A few months." Months. It had been going on for months, right under my nose while I was working, trusting her, believing that we were okay. I felt like I was losing control of the ground beneath me. The room was spinning, and I had to grip the doorframe to steady myself. It felt surreal, like I was watching a scene from someone else's life. How had I ended up here? I kept asking myself, trying to understand where things had gone so wrong. What did I do wrong, I asked, the pain in my voice undeniable. Why wasn't I enough? I didn't expect an answer, but I needed to ask. I needed to know how the person I loved could do something like this to me. She shook her head, still crying, but the words that came out of her mouth were just a string of apologies. "I'm so sorry. I don't know why I did it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry couldn't fix what she'd broken. The guy, seeing that this was a mess he couldn't clean up, quietly gathered his things and slipped out of the room. I barely noticed him leave. He wasn't important anymore. It was just me and her, standing in the wreckage of what was once our life together. I didn't yell, I didn't throw anything or lose my temper. Instead, I felt this cold, numb calm wash over me. There was nothing left to say, no explanation would make it better. No excuse could undo what had just happened. "I need to go," I said, my voice flat. I couldn't be in that house, in that room, any longer. I turned and walked out, leaving behind the life I thought I had, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. After I walked out of that room, I felt like I was in a daze. Everything felt unreal, like I was stuck in a nightmare, but I couldn't wake up. I left the house without really knowing where I was going. I didn't have a plan or any idea of what to do next. My mind was a blur. I just needed to get away from that place, from her, from everything that had just happened. I didn't even grab any of my things. I just walked out the door with the clothes on my back. I remember getting into my car and sitting there for a few minutes, staring at the steering wheel, trying to figure out what my next move would be. My hands were shaking, my heart still pounding in my chest. At first, I thought about driving far away, just disappearing for a while. I didn't want to face anyone or talk about what I'd just seen. But then I realized I had nowhere to go. I didn't want to be alone in some random place with only my thoughts to keep me company. So I decided to head to my brother's house. He lived about 20 minutes away, and I knew he'd let me crash there without asking too many questions. At least for the time being. The drive felt longer than it actually was. My mind was racing the entire time. I kept replaying the scene over and over in my head, thinking about all the little things I hadn't noticed before. How could I have missed the signs? Was I too trusting? Too naive? I thought back to all the times she had been on her phone, all the excuses she made about staying out late or being too tired when I got home. It all started to add up, and the betrayal just cut deeper. When I got to my brother's place, he took one look at me and knew something was wrong. I didn't have to say much, just that I needed a place to stay for a while. He didn't ask any questions, just nodded and told me I could take the guest room. I was grateful for that. I didn't have the energy to talk about it yet. That night was the first of many sleepless ones. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling every emotion at once. Anger, sadness, betrayal, confusion. How could the person I trusted most in the world do something like this to me? I kept questioning the entire relationship, wondering if everything we'd built together had been a lie. Had she ever truly loved me, or was I just a placeholder for something better? I felt sick to my stomach, my mind running in circles. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together. The image burned into my memory. It was like a bad movie on repeat, and I couldn't turn it off. The emotional fallout was overwhelming. I didn't know how to deal with it, and the truth was, I wasn't sure I ever would. In the days that followed, I found myself going through the motions, trying to figure out what came next. Should I confront her again? Should I try to save the relationship? But deep down, I already knew the answer. There was no coming back from something like this. The trust was gone, shattered into a million pieces, and no amount of talking or apologies could ever put it back together. I thought about packing up my stuff from the house, but even the thought of going back there made my stomach turn. I didn't want to step foot in that place again. Not while the memory of what had happened was still so fresh in my mind. I knew I needed to make a decision soon, though. I couldn't live in limbo forever. In the end, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't stay with someone who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I deserved better. I deserved someone who respected me, who valued our relationship enough to stay faithful. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was the right one. I filed for divorce a week later, and as hard as it was, I felt a sense of relief. It was the first step toward moving on, toward reclaiming my life. Looking back on everything, I've come to realize just how quickly life can change. One moment can make you question everything you thought you knew. It's a harsh lesson, but it's one I needed to learn. I've learned to trust my instincts and never settle for less than I deserve. If there's one thing I want people to take away from my story, it's this. Don't ignore the signs, and don't stay in a situation where you're not respected. Life is too short to waste on people who don't value you. Sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do. And in the end, I'd rather be alone than with someone who doesn't care enough to stay faithful.